Gotta say, I'm digging that new beat. It's not the old beat, but I'm digging the new beat. Both of them, by the way, by my good buddy Slick Rock over on Twitter. I don't know if he wants me shouting him out, but I'm shouting him out anyway. He does it for fun. Slick Rock, you're my dude. Welcome to Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. It's Tuesday. Getting back into the grind here after Memorial Day weekend. We did a show yesterday. Quick little sojourn through the second half of the Dan Vespers Old Man Squad Centers board. And now we pivot back into fun with other adult humans. That's what I call it when I have a guest on the show. Today we're going to be talking to Dan Titus, fellow Dan, and perhaps a member of the Old Man Squad fan. I don't know what it's called. You'll hear about that in a minute. Dan's awesome. It's a great conversation. We get into injured lists. We get into the Olympics. We get into the 65-game threshold and what that all means for this past season. But then most importantly, what that means for coming seasons. And again, pulling back the curtain, I'm just going to be playing a recorded video that he and I recorded not that long, about an hour ago, actually. I got to get better with the video tech. I know. Now I'll figure this thing out. Give me time. I'll get it all squared away. I'm Dan Vespers, at Dan Vespers on social, basically Twitter. I don't use the other ones because for basketball, that's the fast one. And this, of course, is a presentation of the Old Man Squad Sports Network, which I believe is up to 7 or 8 shows now. We're humming, baby. We're humming. I managed to get this one back out there live on Twitter today, fixed some stuff that was goofed up last week. I think it had to do with when Twitter changed its name, so I had to reattach the various destinations, and I did that. But if anything, those last couple of shows, a nice reminder to all of you that are or prefer, I should say, watching on Twitter, you might not get all of them. You might not get all of them. So please, for me, in addition to for you, so you can get all the shows, for me, because Twitter gives we content creators almost nothing. And that's fine. That wasn't what was promised. But if I can convince you guys to watch on YouTube or listen on whatever recorded method, iTunes, Spotify, whatever, that's so much better for me and for any podcast host. You can take that, you can basically run the gamut with that. The threshold is like, the worst is Twitter, because we get like $1 for every some number of millions of hits that come in. YouTube, you get like $4 or $5 per 1,000, something like that. Like I'm telling you guys, man, I got nothing to hide. And then traditional pod channels, it's like 7 times better than that. So whatever you can do to listen on traditional pod channels, that's the preferred one. If you want to support a content creator, which is what I am now. I'm a content creator. Lean into that, Dan. That's the way to do it. Subscribe, listen, like, share, whatever you guys on that front. It's all very much appreciated. But you guys don't need to wait any longer. Let me get the interview with Dan going. It's awesome. You're going to love it. Here's something fun for you guys. Because we recorded this and because I'm showing it on a video, this is now going to be played in real time. So I basically just have to step away from my computer for the next half an hour, and then I come back to do the outro also in real time. What do you guys think Dan's going to do when he walks away for a half hour? Oh, the possibilities are endless. All right. Let's talk to Titus. I told y'all I was going to do guests. Guests are coming, man. One after the other. I'm lining you guys up like sardines, but damn it, this is so much fun for me. The Dans, listen, there's simply no way to exceed the power of 2 Dans in the same podcast space. My good buddy Dan Titus. First of all, I don't know. I get lost in idiotic thoughts. First of all, hi. Welcome to the new pod. Thank you so much for coming on.
Dan to Dan, thank you for inviting me on to your new show, your new network, man. I'm really excited for you and happy for you to take the plunge. It's not easy. I've been there myself, but to start your own network, man, that takes a different set of
You can say it. I don't have it. There are no.
That's true.
You do whatever.
You got to have a big set to do this on your own. So I applaud you, brother. I do.
Well, I'm either courageous or an idiot, and I haven't figured out which one of the two it actually is. Dan, of course, you guys all know him from Yahoo Fantasy, Roto World as well. And you and I have talked on my previous iteration. On yesterday's show, I did accidentally call it Fantasy NBA Today, and I knew that was going to happen at some point because I said that show. I think I did about 2,000 episodes of that show. And so to come into this one and very slowly go like, welcome to Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. And it's not because I don't want to say the name. I picked it. It's just I did so many freaking intros over the years that it just popped right out of my mouth. Anyway, check out all of Dan's stuff. Hey, before we even get into fantasy, what are you up to these days? It's off season, so I don't even know what I'm up to these days.
We're up to kind of probably the same things, man. We got the kiddos, so it's just trying to keep them at bay or somewhat satisfied and happy with all things. Hope you had a good holiday weekend. But yeah, man, I've just been doing a lot of, retroactive analysis of, how things went, where things possibly could go. I think, interestingly enough, I think we've seen a couple players emerge out of the playoffs that I'm like, where would I draft them next year? So yeah, it's really just been a look back and then kind of a projection for what's going forward here. And I'm really excited for, hopefully Summer League and then the Olympics. I think the Olympics is actually going to have a pretty significant impact on our fantasy projections next year. So yeah, man, I think it's actually for the 200 people that are actually paying attention to fantasy basketball right now, it's great to actually still have someone to talk through these things with. So yeah, glad you're still doing the good work.
We're a straight pipeline to the degenerates, and I'm totally fine with that. I was going to, by the way, and I'm still going to get around to it. We'll ask Dan some of the lessons learned from this season gone by, but you actually brought up a couple of things that you were talking about there that you said, and I was like, you know what? If we have to do lessons learned on the next time we talk, so be it. I want to follow up on that. How do you weigh the impact of the Olympics on next season?
It matters. I mean, do you see that we're sending literally the old man squad to the Olympics. So
I couldn't be happier.
But I'm looking at Kevin Durant, Stephen Curry, LeBron James, all these guys that have a lot of mileage on their careers and on their legacies here that you got to expect there's going to be some load management in the beginning of the season. And I know that there's that 65 game threshold, which I think was actually one of the biggest takeaways of the season, how successful it was. But we're going to have some serious question marks around a lot of key players. Giannis Antetokounmpo, he didn't play in the playoffs. Is he ready to gear up right again for the Olympics? Luka Doncic is going on a crazy run here. Could lead to the NBA Finals. What's that going to look like for him playing for Slovenia? There's going to be a lot of fantasy implications here of key stars. Like we're talking, top 3 draft picks, round 3 draft picks.
Although some of them may be top 3 overall.
Yeah.
Also.
I mean, Victor Wembanyama, it's Rudy Gobert. I mean, there's going to be so many players that are playing late into the postseason here that I feel like there's going to be some kind of maintenance schedule as we're approaching training camp, preseason, and then ultimately the regular season.
Yeah, injuries, slow starts, all that stuff kind of creeps in a little bit. But at least, selfishly, it gives us all something to watch during a time that would normally be kind of the dog days of the offseason. So
it's very true.
The balance.
It's that or baseball, right? But I know you're a baseball guy, so you don't mind. But
I don't play fantasy baseball. I watch baseball just for my own enjoyment. I worked in baseball for a really long time, and that I loved my time. I want to make sure that I say that I had an absolute damn ball calling radio for a minor league baseball team, but it also kind of ruined watching baseball for me. So I was like, look, I'm watching and talking about 140 games. I don't need more. Now I watch and talk about basketball. So having baseball on the TV is actually kind of nice. Another thing you said when I asked what you were up to was talking about some playoff performances that crept into your brain. So before we get to that 65 game threshold, who were you talking about, if you don't mind my prying voice here?
Yeah, I was thinking about, number one, can Daniel Gafford run this back. I mean, he was a top 40 player on a per game basis in category leagues. And from what I've seen in this playoffs is like, this guy looks like he could be the starting center. Like, I know Derek Lively was their draft pick this year, but this guy has always proven on a limited basis, like he's a permanent beast. He only needs 20, 25 minutes to be successful. And I think there's a good chance that he could replicate what we're seeing in the playoffs here. But then also Andrew Nemhard has me like scratching my head. I'm like, is this dude for like, can he actually be like a, call it 9th, 8th, 9th, 10th round pick next year? And I feel like if Pascal Siakam doesn't re-sign with this team, it's going to look a lot different. And I think there actually could be a place for Andrew Nemhard to be a fantasy asset next year. Now, yeah, he's balling with Tyrese Halliburton missing the last few games, but I can't deny what I've seen from his passing, his playmaking, his defense, his mid-range game is so confident. Going up against the best team in the Eastern Conference, I think that switch, the same switch we saw with Jalen Brunson when Luka Doncic was out and he kind of carried the Mavericks, I'm getting a similar vibe from Andrew Nemhard. And he's super young, so I think there's just a lot of promise going forward for him and his fantasy appeal.
Interesting. Talking to Dan Titus of Yahoo Fantasy Sports, which is, of course, the site that I pretty much exclusively talk about on this podcast. So that's a good fit. Also of Roto World, the Roto World basketball show. Okay, now, sorry, I heard something and then I wanted to ask follow-up questions on it. This is, and you and I actually DM'd about this idea, which is I don't really like to script my shows at all. I think there's something fun about, an organic response and where a conversation goes. So you accidentally said a few things and my brain was like, nope, not going to let those go until I have to find out what he's talking about. But what are the main takeaways from this last season? What jumped out at you? And I know you mentioned the 65 game threshold.
Yeah, for me as an actual fantasy player, I think I mismanaged my fab. And it's something that I haven't done extensive analysis on, but I need to be more efficient with my spending.
I wish the people, by the way, I'm so sorry to jump in, but a lot of people are going to be watching this, but more people are going to be listening. And I want the people listening to know the wistful look on Dan's face as he's talking, like looked off into the distance, trying to find the cloud that had the answer. It was I mismanaged. And it was just like this moment where I could see that your heart was
dude, it cost me like 3 championships. Like I don't know what I was. I mean, I know what I was thinking in the moment. Like, you see a hot pickup on free agency, you want to jump in on it, you want to make sure you win the bid. But I think it just came back to haunt me in way too many situations this year, more than it ever has in the past. When I got to the semifinals and then ultimately the finals, where I had no budget and I'm sitting here playing the game of how can I get as many quality games as I can. And of course, a lot of my opponents are watching my content, so they know what I'm planning to do. And they just outbid me for all of it. And then I'm just at this huge deficit not to win. And I know that this is also a plug for, hey, you should play Roto and you don't have these problems. But
that's fine. I'm trying not to be such a dick about that anymore. Trying. Not sure how well it's going. You are actually in a tough spot too, because one of the things that I did when I could see, because I was creating leagues by just putting a tweet out, and then everybody was like, yes, of course, I want to be in the league. And then I was like, wait a minute. Every single one of these people is listening to the show I put out, and then I don't get any of the players I want. So I kind of gravitated towards, and this is the punchline of this, I've gravitated towards Yahoo public prize leagues. But then, of course, today we're talking to Dan Titus of Yahoo Fantasy. So you can't put anything out over there. All the people in the public prize leagues, like, you're the content that pops up on their screen. Yeah. I don't know what the hell you do at that point. You got to sandbag it a little bit, I think.
I wish I could I can't even participate in the public league just for conflict of interest reasons. But you'll find me. You can find me in some places. If there's some money involved, I will probably be playing. But
Dan will pop up. So what would you do differently then, fab wise? You're talking exclusively this is daily waivers type of deal.
Correct, daily waivers. So I think what I realized is obviously it's all league dependent, and you view the patterns of your opponents. But I noticed that this year, especially, maybe this was just the settings, that a lot of money wasn't really spent on free agent pickups. So you could wait a day. Maybe this guy comes off for waivers. You're not having to put in, $5, $10, $12 for him. You can get him for $1. You can get him for nothing. Maybe you choose the next guy in line and wait for that big money spend. The guy that the one that was most, prevalent in my mind, this guy had like $60 going into the postseason. I'm like, I feel like spending 40 in the regular season and then 60 for the playoffs seem like a good ratio to me, because I think the biggest part of when you're playing daily head-to-head categories is like, there's going to be people in the scrambles in the conference finals that are going to have to be dropping really good players when they don't want to, just to kind of get those additional stats for a certain category or to win the week. And you could scoop up that. If you're in a position where you have a bye week, it's like, wow, let me get this really good player. If you don't have enough money to bid for those guys, you're going to be at a disadvantage. So I think next year my strategy is going to have at least $55 going into the playoffs, 60 being the target, though.
I think what I ended up doing, for whatever this is worth, and I actually consider myself more of a fab novice, frankly. I'm for most of my adult life, I've played in first come, first serve leagues, but getting more into the Yahoo public setting, those are all fab leagues. They're 100% that direction. I ended up, and this is not on purpose, but during the regular season, I mostly went with 0 bids on almost everything I did. Largely because the number of guys that pop up during the regular season that actually last for more than 2 or 3 weeks is like 4 for the whole year. It was like Colin Sexton, Alex Caruso. I don't think he was heavily drafted. There were like one.
DiVincenzo was probably in that 97% undrafted territory.
So then you drop 10, 15, $20 or whatever it is on a guy like that if you really believe that they're going to be a length of season guy. But the rest of them, I pretty much went 0. So I went into my head-to-head playoffs with, I think, in the 30 to 40 range, something like that. And it turned out to be about right, because I basically was just like, look, every move I make, I'm just going to put a $4 bid on that guy. And it's almost going to guarantee I get him, because everybody else is probably going zeros, because you're setting up like a 9.
Exactly right. The queue gets a little deep.
The queue gets real deep. I'm like scrolling down my screen on a monitor, not my phone, trying to figure out, okay, well, because then you have to put each player in for each guy you were willing to drop in the order you would want them on your team, knowing that if you don't get that first one, that knocks like 4 moves off your board. And so you got like a queue of 12 moves ready to go. But that ended up working out okay, actually. I think there was one guy I got outbid on in that, but I had the backup $4 move, so I got the second choice there. And then you can look at it from this other, and I'm going to stop monologuing here because like doing bad math on air is great podcast. You have a maximum of 4 moves a week. So you're like, okay, if I have about $16 per week, that probably gets me through this. So 32 if you have a buy, 48 if you don't, which comes right back to the $50 you were talking about. 48 for 3 weeks. That kind of got it done. All right. I don't know. I didn't have a question at the end of that.
That was good. Back of the envelope math there.
Yeah, I know.
It does sound right. And I guess for perspective, I was probably messing around with like half that. I think I had like $25 going to 3 separate championship rounds. And so, I wind up losing in 2 of 3 of those. So that was my biggest regret, and my takeaways, like just manage the money a little bit better. In terms of other takeaways, I would just say, like, if you're a commissioner, make sure you have at least 1 IL plus and 1 actual IL. I'm still trying to figure out what the perfect balance is, because now that we're out of the COVID era for the most part, in terms of the way that injuries are being tracked, I feel like you don't want to have too much of a commitment to this IL spots, because then, people can play all kinds of roster gymnastics to kind of get an edge there. But I feel like 1 IL plus and 1 IL at minimum should be the standard. Maybe you can go 2 ILs or maybe 2 IL pluses and 1 IL. Maybe that's the sweet spot. But I would just make sure you have at least 1 or 2 of those for IL plus, just because these day-to-day injuries happen, suspensions, etc. It's just a great way to account for all of that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And if you go too hard on those IL pluses, like you were talking about, there's always someone on a team who's like questionable on an injury report. So they get that game time decision tag, and then boop, someone can drop them in an IL plus. Even if they're going to play the next day, they get basically a free bonus roster slot for the day in between games for that guy who didn't end up missing any actual basketball games. If you were, Dan, if you were setting up a league, would you advise people to err on the side of having more IL slots or fewer while they figured out what worked for them? Which side do you think is better? Because like I agree with you, like it's hard to find that like perfect midpoint. But if someone was hunting for it, should you err on the side of too many?
That's what I'm thinking. Maybe 1 IL plus and 2 IL spots for those long-term injuries. Because I do feel like the manipulation of the IL plus could become a thing or a problem. Like I think this is the first year it really got introduced in terms of adoption on Yahoo standard leagues. And I've been kind of pushing behind the scenes to make it the standard. And I don't know that we'll get there, like the default. And I don't know that we should with all the manipulation that was going on with it. I'm sure I've utilized it before. Sometimes it just happens.
You should. I mean, if it's available,
and and if you do it correctly, like it could definitely work to managing your team better, more efficiently. So I think I'm leaning towards 1 IL plus 2 ILs because injuries do happen. And you want to at least have one. You just at least have one. But I think if you have one, that would reduce the amount of manipulation that could possibly go on.
Yeah, I think there's a benefit, probably a larger benefit to having 1 IL plus, because most of the time teams are dealing with some guy who has a minor injury where they're missing 2 to 3 games and they don't get the actual IL tag. And yes, if the team is perfectly healthy and they have the one guy who's a game time decision, that team was already in a good place anyway. And they should use it. You know, there is a slight advantage there, but I do feel like the benefits outweigh the negatives in that particular situation. Again, talking to Dan Titus of Yahoo Fantasy Sports. What about the 65 game limit you mentioned earlier? You felt like that was, from a fantasy standpoint, very successful. This is where we fantasy weirdos have to sort of like, we're going to fight this battle with the non-fantasy weirdos. They're like, oh, my guys are hurt all the time. And we're like, well, we got 65 games out of them. So how do we reconcile that?
Let's go through the list of names here. Anthony Davis, Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, Paul George, Kevin Durant, Stephen Curry, LeBron James, Zion Williamson. All these dudes played over 65 games, at least 65 games this year. From a fantasy perspective, all of those guys, except Zion Williamson, went before the 3rd round. So you're spending a significant amount of draft capital on these star players. And what is going to hurt your product more? The star players not playing in games, or the guys actually playing and actually having some kind of fantasy viability throughout the rest of the season? So from the whole experience standpoint of playing the actual fantasy game, this was a huge W for it. The fact that you're able to, and I know you're a huge fan of scooping up value in these aging veteran guys that nobody wants, because the fantasy community is obsessed with the new, young, shiny, bright toy that could be the future potential. But like when you get people like Kawhi Leonard in the 3rd round, James Harden falling upwards to the 4th round in some cases with his suspension earlier this year, and then he ends up playing 65 games, that's what wins you fantasy leagues. Like, no one expected those guys to play that many games. Anthony Davis, top 5 guy when he plays over 65 games. It just changed the landscape. And I think it was a much more enjoyable fantasy season because we actually saw players play. I looked at the numbers. Adam Silver said that star players missed 15% less games this season than they did in 2022, 2023. And if you go back, according to Sportico, from 2017 to 2018 to the 2022, 2023 season, the number of star absences from players in back-to-back games, meaning they played one, missed the other, went from 47 to 88. That is a horrible product. Like, to double that over that course of time of players not being able to play a back-to-back set. And we're not talking about, these average players. Like, these are the guys that people pay money to go to games to go see, and the ones that anchor your fantasy, your squads here. So the fact that we actually got to see players play, and I get the other side of the coin. We didn't get to see Kawhi Leonard in the playoffs. who knows if Tyrese Halliburton's injury was, a byproduct of all of the stuff that he was working throughout the season to be able to get to that all NBA status, to then help his contract, his future contract value. That's kind of the chicken or the egg. And I don't know what the right answer is. All I know is that from a fantasy perspective, I think it's a really good thing.
Yeah, I have trouble disagreeing with you on that. I think for like top 100 players in fantasy this year, the average number of games played was back up near 70 after it had been down in that 67 to 68 range for a couple of years. And I know it doesn't sound like a big jump, but it sure as crap felt like a big jump. 2-3 extra games out of most guys across fantasy sports. And I think a lot of that was the names you mentioned, the guys that were expected to miss 25 games that missed 15, 12, whatever it was instead. And that pulled the whole average number of missed games up a little bit. I'm going to ask you a very difficult question now. And the answer, I don't really know, is perfectly acceptable. But how do you think this rule impacts the second year for a lot of these guys? Because it's like, oh, well, they had enough in the tank to do it once. Do they have enough in the tank to do it twice? And you already mentioned, Dan, about the Olympics in between. This coming season feels like the ultimate like headbutt between old dudes needing rest and Adam Silver wanting 65 ball games. May have to change the name of my network for one season. I'm a little worried about it, honestly. But do you think those guys can survive it? Maybe some, but not others?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a some, not others. One name that I was kind of wondering about going forward is Joel Embiid, because he can't stay healthy. But at the same time, it's like now you're not qualifying for player awards. How do the Sixers now manage him going forward? Does he play less minutes? How do they preserve these veteran players that may be a little bit more prone to injury? I don't want to call people injury prone, but there are people with a history of not being available to play. And, I think we'll probably see all the guys that are participating in the Olympics be closer to the 65 than they will be not, but it's going to be definitely a struggle for some to get there. Mainly looking at Kawhi Leonard, being that we don't know what the significance of his knee injury is. All we know is that he couldn't play in the playoffs, and it doesn't sound like he tore anything, but he was also on that roster for the Olympic team. I'd be hard pressed to think he's going to try to push it, knowing that he couldn't be their first team in the Olympics. And let's not forget, James Harden's an unrestricted free agent. Paul George is rumored to want to possibly be exploring other options. He may not have anybody left there as a co-star. So it's going to be really important for Kawhi Leonard to be healthy and ready to go by the beginning of the season. So I think most people will probably try to prioritize the next season, I would hope. And maybe we'll see some load management in the Olympics, and we'll see some of these younger guys play a little bit more time than these starters that we typically see a bulk of the minutes in previous Olympic experiences.
Yeah, we may get more data when we find out if these guys are even going to play in the Olympics, if they're healthy.
Yeah, right? That's true. Just because you're on the roster doesn't mean that, LeBron James has been chilling for quite some time now. He'll be fine. But, some of the other guys we might see maybe, I want to say maybe, was it Drew Holiday?
Yeah, he was the last guy.
When the Bucks won, or maybe it was Chris Middleton. It was a combo of both of them. I remember they were both kind of eased into their Olympic experience because they had that deep postseason run when they won the champ. I think it was when they won the championship. Did they go to the champ? They win the championship that year?
I can't. Well, it might have been FIBA. No,
I think it was FIBA. You're right. I think it was FIBA. You're right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's actually really good. We'll get more information in like whatever the hell it is, month and a half, 2 months, something like that. But yeah, because it's a lot right now. This was like, and we'll wrap it up. I'll get you back to today. This was a glorious year to be hunting old dudes. Like you mentioned it, Anthony Davis, top 3 fantasy season because of games played. That was not. And I was perfectly happy drafting Kawhi Leonard at 25 or whenever he was going by the end of draft season with the assumption he was playing like 60 ball games, and we got an extra, whatever it was, 10 dozen out of him. So that was a massive steal. I actually got Harden on the last Sunday before the season started in a draft in the mid 50s, like mid to late 5th round. And I had people laughing at my team. They were like, your team is so unbelievably old. And that team just boat raced everyone because Harden played. And like, I think I had KD on that team also. I just got these old dudes that nobody wanted, and they all played 10 more games than anyone thought. And I think I won that Roto League by like 9.
It was so on brand for you.
I know.
This was the season for you to change up everything and just like, I'm committing old man squat. Like, this is what it is.
I know. But now we're going to the next one, and all these guys are going to play 52 games, totally hurt. And I'm going to have to be like, well, it was a good run. The old man squad had one. Network had one damn year. Dan, thank you so much for coming on. Can we do this again super soon?
Yes, because one thing I just wanted to say to you, as a person that ranks players through like 400, your bucketology show was awesome, and I'm totally on board with tiering from now on. I actually tiered anyway by position, but the mechanism that we use to do the rankings doesn't put the tiers.
It's impossible. You're doing an impossible task.
But it's just give us tiers. Tiers is the way.
I really hope, by the way, that because what I wanted to make sure I was doing in that show was giving a ton of credit to the people that have to rank by number. But it's impossible. I was like, please, you guys have an easier way to do this. You're doing something that can't be done, and you leave yourself open to infinite criticism because people are like, oh, you had so-and-so at 250, and he finished at 175. And it's like, that's one game. That guy needed to have one good game, and that's the difference. And now I look like an idiot because I missed by 6 rounds, but it doesn't matter. So I hope that's how that came off, because it's impossible to do what you're doing. And you're not.
But I think it also is more sensible for someone trying to digest as they're going through a draft. Where's the rough area of where I should be drafting him versus like a specific, oh, well, he's 25 and should I get him at 36? Does that really matter? No, it's the bucketing of the people that matters of where you should be drafting people. So I think it's very smart.
More than the kind things you're saying, I'm actually very relieved because I finished that show and I was like, God, I hope it didn't sound like I was attacking a rank list. I actually just think it's a really, really hard way to do it. And frankly, I can't, because it's like, I don't like, these guys are, there's these 6 guys here that are interchangeable for me, depending on what stat you need and the range they should go in. So I'm glad to know that it didn't, like, I was trying so hard to make sure that I was giving credit where I felt it was due. So that actually makes me very happy.
No, you're doing good work behind the scenes, because weirdly enough, I was doing the rankings and the tiers, but I always preferred tiers because I'm like, oh, it's much easier to talk about this as like, what type of player does this person kind of fit in? And that's kind of how I always have like each tier kind of ranked off, like, all right, who are the superstars? Who are the breakouts? Who are the up and comers? Who are the veterans that kind of suck but still do stuff? Like, it's just, that's how I would always go through my drafts, like as I'm actually drafting. So to me, it just made all the sense in the world. So I appreciate you bringing it up. Now let's see if we can kind of change the tide of all of fantasy to think that way. Like,
yeah, the problem I think is that people just want the numbers, so you're stuck. You're stuck. And again, you're not alone. Brood did it and still does it for many years at Ethos, and like, I know the boards are out there. I'm like floored at what people have to do to split up.
Dude, like, and maintaining them. It's not even when you get your first one out there. You got to constantly, man, you're moving. All right, hold on. Let me move number 89 to 112 here. Let me move 113 to 186. Like,
it's impossible when you could just be like, you know what? I'm going to move this guy down 1 bucket. That was so much easier. And I get it. It's like the simple, I saw someone did a meme on it who did the full rank board and was like, can we do buckets now? And it was like, you wimp, yeah, I get it. It's like the wimpy, pathetic way to go. But I feel like it makes a lot of sense from an everyone can understand it standpoint.
Dude, this is all encompassing for fantasy sports. This isn't a basketball thing. We should be bucketing and tiering and everything.
And I'm perfectly willing to have people be like, Dan, you're such a wimp. Just put them in a numerical order. I'm like, yes, I am, but this is easy. But this is a lot easier. Dan Titus of Yahoo Fantasy and Roto World. Dan, anything you want to plug before I let you go?
Got my loser lineup coming out today for the Indiana Pacers. What's next? Talked about a little bit about Andrew Nembhard and Pascal Siakam's future, and I'll be dropping my positional recap for centers tomorrow on Yahoo app. So check that out if you're in the Yahoo Fantasy app.
Beautiful. At Dan Titus on social media. I think I forgot to say that earlier, but I find it easy when folks have their name as their Twitter handle, and then I forget to do it.
Super lazy, but also effective.
Hey, Dan Besbris. I mean, but of course I have a last name that nobody can figure out. Titus is the last name. Dan, thank you again, my man.
Thanks, Dan. Good seeing you.
And welcome back. See, that was fun, wasn't it? I love the cutaway, then the dissolve back into me on the video feeds. Those that are listening, this means nothing to you. Everything can always be edited, sound just so natural on the audio side, and video side requires a little bit more fine tuning, and I am not that great at that yet. If you guys were guessing what Dan did, what did Dan do? Well, the half an hour video was playing during the live stream. The answer is I boiled and ate noodles at my lunch. Walked right over there, around the corner, into the kitchen, boiled some noodles. Had some leftover chicken that I had sauteed over the weekend. Chopped that bad boy up, threw it in there. Had myself some noodles and chicken. Pretty healthy, actually. Yeah, I salted it heavily. And that's fine. I'm sure I'm hypertensive beyond belief. But that's the answer to the question of what the hell did Dan do during the half an hour video break. Not that exciting, I suppose. Big thank you to Dan Titus for carving out time, for coming on the show, for doing it as a video hit, for being another Dan, for having great information. And the nice thing, too, there, and throwing more plaudits, I think I'm using that right, on Dan, is that he really is looking towards the future applications. And that's something that I always want us to be doing on this. And it's part of why when I come into an episode with a guest in particular, I only have like one or two things that I want to get to, because invariably, every one of them says something really interesting, and we can explore that. Going down the rabbit hole on late round picks with Josh, talking about head-to-head leagues with Palio. We've had a lot of Dans on the show lately, by the way. Yeah, I know I'm biased, whatever. Matt Smith, we got into blocks, deep dive on early round blocks. How does this equate? What are the players that we should be looking at or possibly avoiding as we head towards next year? And now Titus today. And it's wonderful because it brings these topics up, and then we can pull them apart and really get to the studs and figure out what does that mean as we go towards the following year. Coming up on the Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Tomorrow, we'll talk to Raphael Johnson, also of Roto World. Raf, awesome dude. Don't even know what we're going to be talking about, which is always super fun. We'll talk to Mike Barner of RotoWire. He'll be on, I believe, the Thursday show. And then, oh, geez, I may have overbooked it for this week. We may have to drop a weekend edition in here or hold something off until Monday of next week. Robin Marks, Believe in Fantasy, fellow member of the Believe Podcast Network, and my good buddy Alex Rickling. Those shows will be taping on Thursday. So one of those will probably drop Friday morning. The other one will either go Saturday or Monday. Haven't decided. It's not neither one is necessarily taking precedence over the other. I think Alex and I are recording earlier in the day, so that might just be the way that I do it. I haven't decided. It's the off season. All I know is I'm really excited to be talking to all of these very awesome dudes and getting you guys, hopefully, applicable fantasy information. One quick note again for those that are watching live on social media here towards the end of the program, please take a minute. I mentioned it at the front end of the show. Please take a minute to subscribe on some other channel, whether it's YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, all the different traditional pod channels. I mentioned at the beginning, from a financial standpoint, which, for better or worse, that is part of the equation here. The most helpful thing is for you guys to listen on one of the traditional pod networks. Those have the best CPM. That's what they call it. You get your ad dollars per 1,000 downloads. YouTube is way farther down the ladder. And then Twitter is like not even on the board. Twitter is exclusively something I stream live to try to get you guys to push over to one of the other avenues. So please, I beg of you, go find it on YouTube. Go find it on one of the traditional channels. They're all in my pinned tweet, which I know you guys can find super easy because I'm talking to you guys watching on social. To everybody that's watching on YouTube or traditional channel, many thank yous. Subscribe, like, rate, and review. If you guys have a second, we got to rebuild 900 of those, and we're at like 30. Little ways to go. All right, that's it. Enough begging and pleading at the end of the podcast as we build up this brand new network. Shout out to all the brand new shows on the Old Man Squad Sports Network. You can follow that on Twitter at Old Man Squad. Very easy to find. I'm at Dan Vespers. Our guest today was at Dan Titus. Have a lovely rest of your Tuesday, everyone. We will see you again tomorrow.